one word: authenticity. And I came up with this word when we did a soft launch in Los Angeles in July, and I don't know where I came up with that, but I guess it was just because I know him so well, and we met later in life, we married later in life, and I was waiting for the right man, and I found him. And he's somebody who comes from a beautiful family, 2 loving parents, a sister, a brother. They all put themselves through school on their own dollar, and they come from a very small town in the state of Arkansas, and I come from a big city in Canada called Toronto. So two opposites meet in some ways, and I just believe in everything he believes in, and I've listened to him over the years speak of the problems in the country and the things that he feels like he wants to change, and I think he's the man, and I think you should take a listen to him. Pat Harris.
It is funny because Carol is, I think when she says she's sort of listened to me, that's sort of an understatement. She has to listen to me yell is what she didn't say, and rant and rave. And finally, I think she just got sick of it and said, go out and do something instead of yelling at the TV all the time. So go out and actually accomplish something. My wife is, I have to brag, give me a minute. My wife is an incredible jazz singer, pianist. She travels all over the world. She's one of the great jazz singing pianists in the world. She has a #1 album in Japan for several months. She is incredibly well known and talented, been nominated 8 times for a Juno Award, which is the Canadian equivalent of the Grammy. And so I get to brag on her a little bit because she has the talent in the family. Although, with one exception, James was saying to me earlier, he said, I asked him, what part of the program? He said, you are the program. I said, well, I thought to myself, if I'm the program, then I probably ought to sing a little bit, dance a little bit, do something to entertain. I am a terrific disco dancer. The one thing people don't know. When I was in college, Saturday Night Fever came out, and I spent all my time in the discos. I actually took a class at the University of Arkansas in disco dance, which I had the 2nd highest grade in. To this day, I can still line dance to Night Fever. Okay, so that I may, if it gets really bad in here and you start booing me, and I break into a line dance to Saturday Night Fever, that's why. Obviously, one of the main things everybody always asks me is, why are you running? Why are you running for the United States Senate? You've never been in politics before. Your career has been largely as a civil rights and criminal defense attorney in Los Angeles. That's what I've been doing for the last 25 years. And so people ask, why in the world are you making a decision to get into politics? I tell them it's pretty basic. I'll start back about a year ago. And about a year ago, I was thinking about getting in the political scene because I've been disturbed by what's happened, by what's been happening. But I became enraged, I guess is the right word, over the Supreme Court nomination of Merrick Garland and what occurred and how the Democrats, basically my party, rolled over and did not fight for what I think was one of the most constitutional abominations in the history of this country. What the Republicans did to stop that, to prevent what was clearly stated in the Constitution was the correct procedure for Barack Obama to nominate a Supreme Court justice. This wasn't something that was ambivalent or something that legally you could look at and say, well, maybe in the last year of a presidency you shouldn't be allowed to. There was no precedence for it. There's nothing even remotely. And keep in mind, the Republicans are the strict constitutionalists. It has to be written exactly in the Constitution or we can't do it. But they created this exception all of a sudden, and the Democratic Party, instead of absolutely going ballistic, the general attitude in the Democratic Party was, we're going to get elected. We're going to win the election with Hillary, whatever. She'll get to nominate somebody. Let's don't fight it. Let's don't push it. My problem is that I think this has become the Democratic Party's sort of modus operandi over the last few years, and I think that was the epitome of what I see is their failure to fight. We have a senator, a sitting senator, whose basic philosophy, admittedly, and bragging about it, is that she prefers to compromise. She prefers to work across the aisle. I don't think that's a bad philosophy per se. I do think there are times to compromise. I think there are times to work across the aisle. This is not the time. This is a time to fight. We're looking at probably the greatest danger to this country we have seen in over 100 years. And we can't just sit by and say we're going to compromise. For the last 7 to 8 years, while Barack Obama was president of this country, every single thing that he proposed, every single major measure didn't get one single Republican vote. And yet the sitting senator from California says she's going to continue to work across the aisle. Work across the aisle to what? You're not getting them to agree to anything. And as long as money, corporate money, is being pumped into their campaigns, you're not going to get their support or agreement to do anything. We cannot continue to have politics as usual. It's not going to work. For 25 years of my life, I have been a fighter. That's what I do. I've gone into courtrooms as a criminal defense attorney and as a civil rights attorney. I've gone into courtrooms. I've fought for every cause you can imagine. I have fought groups, corporations like Pfizer, Wells Fargo, Bank of America. I fought the Catholic Church over the sexual abuse problem with priests. I took on a Catholic church with a client with no money who had actually beat up a priest who had abused him 40 years earlier. And no one would take the case. I took the case. We went against the Catholic Church. We walked into the courtroom. He said, yes, I did it. Jury came and found him not guilty. I have fought Kenneth Starr, who many of you don't remember, who was a special counsel in the 1990s in Whitewater. I fought him for 6 years based on a client I had, Susan McDougal. I've taken on some of the biggest causes and some of the biggest fights in this country, and I haven't been afraid or backed down from any of them. And I won't back down from this. Senator Feinstein said something at a city hall and a town hall in Los Angeles. Said a couple of things that irked me, but one thing she said in particular, she got a little agitated that someone was asking her about single-payer health care. And she said, what do you exactly think one senator can do? Well, I tell you what one senator can do. Look at what one senator's done with, you look at Elizabeth Warren and income inequality in Wall Street, because she goes and she talks about it constantly. She's written books on it. She's on television about it. She's giving speeches about it. And she's made it a national issue. What about what Bernie Sanders has done for single-payer health care? Why? Because he's gone on television about it. He's fought for it. He's written books. I mean, they've gone out and absolutely spent his time focusing on it and pushing it. One senator can do a hell of a lot if that senator is willing to stand up and fight. We can't have senators who just say, well, I'm going to sit in my job, I'm going to do my 6 years, I'll go home at night, and I'll work across the aisle when it's not working. We have to have people who are willing, not only willing, but want to go and change this system, who want to fight this establishment and change things, real change. We can't keep saying, the word change is used a lot. We can't keep saying we're going to change things and send the same people back to Washington and expect the same or different results. It's not going to happen. If you talk about the people running in this race, whether it be Senator Feinstein or whether it be Kevin De Leon, whoever you talk about, you're talking about people who have been politicians, and we keep doing the same thing, saying, well, they've got experience, let's send them to D.C. or let's send them to office. And expect something's going to change. It's not going to change. It's not going to change until, and I'm going to use Senator Feinstein's words, she said, we do not need rabble-rousers in Washington.
exactly what we need. We need rabble-rousers. We need people who are going to go there and raise some hell. That's the only way we're going to get real change. I was going to talk about a couple of things tonight, but obviously what's in the news is what's going on right now. In fact, I don't know if they're voting right now. I'm not even sure on the tax measure. I know they were scheduled for a 7 o'clock vote. I don't know what exactly.
They pushed it.
Did they?
It's
Okay.
It's
Tomorrow morning?
It's tomorrow morning.
But I want to talk about that briefly, because here again is an example where, you know, we ought to be just absolutely apoplectic as the Democratic Party about what's going on with this tax bill. This tax bill, once again, contributes to an incredible imbalance in this country between the haves and the have-nots. I don't know if you remember, some of you I know remember a few years ago when there was, I can't remember the exact issue, but the lovely senator from Texas, Ted Cruz, got up on the floor of the Senate and read Green Eggs and Ham for 10 hours or whatever he did. And people said, you know, that was ridiculous, or it was crazy, and everybody hates Ted Cruz. Well, he did have some effect. Whether you like it or not, I don't like him certainly, but whether you like it or not, it had an effect. And when people say, well, he's the most hated man in the Senate, well, this isn't Miss Congeniality pageant. You need to be hated. If you're going to stand up for something and people hate you, then by God, that's the price you pay. That's the price you pay for standing for something. And that's what the Democratic Party needs to be doing. I look at this measure and I say, okay, it contributes to income inequality. We all know that. It's not even a question. I mean, the silliness that this began with, that this was going to be a middle-class tax cut, they're not even pretending anymore. I mean, it's so ludicrous. We can see that it's not what it's intended for. It is an issue that is going to dramatically affect people's lives. Democrats, and Bernie Sanders was on television the other night, a few others have gotten up. Democrats need to be all over this. They need to be yelling from the treetops. Teachers, for God's sake. My mother was a teacher. My mother probably spent back then the equivalent of a couple of $1,000s a year on supplies, on things in her classroom. They were eliminating that deduction. Who came up with that idea? Who sat down? What Republican congressman or senator sat down and said, you know, I've got a great idea for reducing the deficit. Let's cut out the $200 deduction for teachers for their supplies. That'll solve the deficit problem. That's just sheer meanness. That's all that is. That is just sheer, absolute meanness. We cannot allow it. We have to talk in real terms about what is going on in this country in income inequality. Because I believe honestly that for all of us here, for activists, for people who are interested in politics, we have issues that we feel strongly about. I obviously have very strong feelings about criminal justice and criminal justice reform. I feel very strongly about eliminating the privatization of prisons. I feel very strongly about bail reform. Those are issues that are important to me. They're issues that I've spent 25 years dealing with. Some of you may have issues that are personal to you, gun control perhaps. Maybe you're something specific to your job or housing. But the truth of the matter is, the one thing that affects us all is income inequality in this country and what's going on with it right now. And I tell people, look, I may have an issue, I may be thinking about it, you may be thinking about it, but what we have to realize is when you're driving down the 99 and you look to your right and you look to your left, the person in the car next to you on your right and the person on the left, it's not likely they're thinking about gun control or they're thinking about climate change. The odds are they're thinking about, how am I going to pay the rent tomorrow? Can I put my kid through college? Am I going to have to take a third job? Those are the issues that affect people and affect people directly. Those are the issues they're thinking about, and those are the things we have to concentrate on if we are going to start this country back on the right road. I tell people we have to first begin with the understanding of income inequality. That income inequality is actually a good thing. You have to start with the basic concept. And I explain it this way. Let's say that, for example, I'll take my team here. Let's say that Julia is working as a nonprofit for animal welfare. That's her life. That's what she feels is important to her. So she goes to work every day. She doesn't get paid a lot, but she feels good coming home at night. There's a happiness quotient there. She gets to travel some. She gets to help and feel good about things. She's not making a huge amount of money, but she feels good about her life, and that's who she is. Same, my team member Max here. Max isn't the most ambitious guy, let's say. Let's say he's pretty happy. He's working down at the lumber yard. He's got his 8-hour job. He's not crazy about the job, but he gets to go home. He goes. He's got a nice little family sitting at home. When he gets there, he's going to go home, turn on Wheel of Fortune, have a six-pack. He's okay. Life's not bad. He's moving forward. Now let's take me. Let's say my driving force in life is money. And when I was 8 years old, I opened a lemonade stand. And I did my marketing research, found the best corner to put my lemonade on. I figured out the right ingredients. And by the time I was 15, I had put together Pat's amazing original organic lemonade, which became a huge success, and which I then marketed into a company, and I got employees, and I branched out, and I made money. And all I wanted was, I wanted a big house, I wanted a huge car, I wanted a boat. This was my driving force in life. Okay? In order to look at income inequality, what we have to understand is, because my driving force is money, I have to be rewarded to a certain degree because I have been innovative, I've hired people, I've worked hard, I've dedicated my life to making money and doing this. I need to be rewarded for that. There's no question. But, you knew there was a but coming. But here's the problem we have. You can't have such a huge discrepancy between me and between Julia and between Max. It can't get to a point where the discrepancy in earnings is so incredible that the entire economy is at risk. And that's where we are, ladies and gentlemen. We're reaching that point, if we haven't passed it already. We have such a dramatic income inequality in this country that we now have situations where employers, where I in my lemonade business, I'm now making as much as 5,000 to 10,000 times as much as the workers who are actually helping produce my lemonade in the factory. That's insane. We cannot do that. That is what, and I'm not going to go into a huge historical retrospective here, but that's exactly what happened at the turn of the 20th century with what were known as the robber barons and the Gilded Age. The corporations were making huge, huge amounts of money, and the workers were making next to nothing. And it ended up almost bringing this country to its knees in the Great Depression. We almost had it happen again in 2008. So, of course, the great news is from 2008, we learned our lesson, right? No, we didn't. It's now worse. And we're headed for what something is going to be worse than what we saw in 2008. I looked at my Republican friends, who some of them said, we cannot be doing this bailout, this bank bailout. I said, you're crazy. We got to do the bank bailout. We could ruin the country. Well, I'm not so sure I was right on that one. I'm not so sure they weren't right. I'm not so sure that we shouldn't have let them fail and start it again. Because I'll tell you right now, It took them less. This to this day still just amazes me. It took them less than 1 year to start doing the exact same things they were doing that almost destroyed this country. And we're right back at it. And now we have an administration that's basically willing, what few regulations we put on them, they're now withdrawing them. And we're wondering, I don't know what year it's going to be, 2020, 2022, when it happens again, we're all going to go, wow, we never saw that coming. The only people out of 2008, some of you may have seen the documentary, that were actually charged was a small Korean bank in Koreatown in New York. Out of that entire thing, and let me tell you, as a criminal defense attorney and as somebody who's worked with the United States Justice Department, you could have charged so many people at Bear Stearns, at Goldman Sachs. You could have gone down the list. You could have put half of Wall Street in jail for what they were doing. So what did the U.S. Department of Justice do? They went after the bank in Koreatown, the little family-owned bank. They lost that case, by the way. But that's the only people who actually they went after. We cannot continue on the road we're going. We have to understand the workers, the unions, the people who made this country, the middle class, have to be taken care of. $15 an hour minimum wage is just a start. We have to eliminate things like, as many of you know, some of you may have worked as waiters or waitresses, and the whole tipping arrangement and being taxed on it. We have to eliminate that, allow them to make money, more money than they're making, because that's a huge part of the industry. We have to look at increasing the earned income tax credit for families. There are a number of things we have to start with to get this middle class economy, get the middle class and get the economy moving again. But the first thing we've got to do is recognize the problem and start moving forward on it. I will tell you this. I believe very, very strongly that this country has the capacity to pay for a huge number of things and to help the middle class that we just refuse to do. Our priorities are totally screwed up. We have a Defense Department that right now has a budget $50 billion more than what Donald Trump asked for. That's Democrats, by the way, Democrats and Republicans pushing. We have a Defense Department that audited themselves. Because, by the way, most people don't know this because I didn't, for sure. The government can't audit the Defense Department. Barbara Lee, a congresswoman out of Oakland, has been pushing for years for a bill to make the government be allowed to audit the Defense Department. You can't. It's crazy. The Defense Department audited itself and then hid the audit. A whistleblower gave the audit to the Washington Post. Turned out $125 billion in waste over the last 5 years in administrative waste. Okay? We're not talking weapons, we're not talking wars, we're not talking anything. We're talking $125 billion in copying paper and pens and secretaries and everything else in sheer waste. That in itself is a huge, huge problem. That money can be taken, has been cut from programs and given to the Defense Department. It's been cut from programs of the arts. It's been cut from programs that have to do with science and scientific research and technology research. Those areas have been cut in order for the Defense Department to basically waste a huge amount of money. Alzheimer's, for example, research, they asked for last year about $5 billion in order, because they think they're close to curing Alzheimer's, which would have an enormous effect on most families. And instead, they gave it about $1.5 billion, and gave the rest to the Defense Department. We have to take, well, I'll tell you a favorite quote of mine from Winston Churchill. World War II. His defense secretary came to him and said, I think we can help pay for the war effort if we cut back on arts, if we cut back on some of the medical care, and if we cut back on some of the educational costs, I think we can help pay for the war effort. At which point, Winston Churchill said, well, exactly what are we fighting for then? That's very true of what we are faced here. This is what I think is important, though. I think if you combine the money we waste with the Defense Department, combined with corporate welfare, and what we don't allow, or what we allow corporations not to pay, you're talking about a huge influx of money in this country that could take care of the middle class, could take care of single-payer health care, could take care of so many different things that we need in this country. Scientific research, medical research. Our priorities are screwed up. We got to get them back on. Now, I'm going to end by saying one thing, and then I'll take some questions. What's extremely important about this is because this is a concept we share. We actually share with independents and some Republicans. We can take these concepts and we can make them national priorities. We don't agree with them on a number of issues. We don't agree with them on gun control, abortion. We can get into all the things we don't agree with them on. But these are concepts we do agree on. If you talk to some independents, most independents, if you talk even to some Republicans, they'll agree with you. The Defense Department's wasted. They'll agree with you about corporate welfare. These are things we can find common ground on to get people elected, because I'm telling you, as a progressive, as someone who does believe very strongly in progressive principles, the one thing I know is you are not going to win elections with just progressives. We need to bring it. You can win local elections. That's not totally true. You can win local elections. You can win low turnout elections. You're not going to win presidential elections and huge elections with just progressives. We have to combine. We have to get independents, particularly independents, and some Republicans. And you guys, this group here, this area here, is ground zero for being able to do that. You have the ability here in the Central Valley to make a huge difference. You have the ability to go door to door and talk to people about the kind of things that actually will make a difference in their lives and will help them, that they will go along with. Healthcare, single-payer healthcare. We are now looking at polls showing that many Republicans, as much as, and I'll let you give exact figures, but I believe it's up to about 40% of Republicans now believe the government should be involved in healthcare. Huge percentages of Democrats believe it, and majorities of independents believe it. We can be talking about these things with people other than ourselves and getting them to vote for us, because we are going to need to win. It's one thing to sit down, and I love nothing more, and for those of you who've come before and seen me, I love nothing more than sit down with you, going and talking about progressive ideas and some of the things that are unique to what we believe in. But we can't just be talking to ourselves. We have to be going out there and getting them, and this is where we do it. This campaign is based on staying outside of LA and San Francisco and working with counties, the rural counties, working also with groups in Fresno, Modesto, Bakersfield, Palm Springs, going to areas where other candidates don't go. This is my, fourth trip to Fresno, just in the last few months. This campaign has been all over Eureka, Shasta, Sacramento, all the way down to San Bernardino. I'm making my 5th appearance in San Bernardino Saturday night. I'm going to deal with the people out in the country, out in the rural areas, because those people understand why Donald Trump got elected. You guys know. People in LA are still talking about we can't figure out why. Your guys' neighbors, you know what happened. This is the people we need to be rallying around. I'll end by telling you this. The first night that Dianne Feinstein announced she was running for re-election, the next night she was in Beverly Hills at a billionaire's home doing a fundraiser. And the press came, and they had pictures of her hanging around the pool, or pictures of some of the Democratic luminaries hanging around the pool. sipping champagne, talking about how wonderful and progressive they were. That night, I was, along with some members of my team, we were in a dive bar in Sonora. I won't tell you why we were in a dive bar because that's a whole different story. But we were in a dive bar in Sonora, and we were talking politics, and a couple of guys came up to us. One guy came up to us and started kind of jumping on us, saying, "You guys, you damn environmentalists, you cost me my job. I was a logger, and you're the ones that cost us." Another guy came up and said, "You know, I'm a trucker. I drive back and forth from San Francisco because I can't afford the housing there." And they were kind of jumping all over us. And so we sat down and we talked to them for, I don't know, half an hour. By the time we were finished, the three of them left, and every single one of them said, "I'm going to vote for you." And the reason they're willing to do it is because they want somebody who'll listen. And they do agree on things like health care. They do agree on corporate welfare. They do agree on things like Wall Street reform. We have common ground, but we've got to win. If we're going to change things, we've got to win. We can't just join amongst ourselves, talk about issues, and not win races. The only way we're going to affect change is to get fighters, but we have to get fighters who are going to win. I can do that. I can go across the spectrum. I grew up in a rural town in Arkansas. I can go down to any diner down here and sit down with a farmer or sit down with a logger or sit down with anybody and talk to them. I don't think you'll see Dianne Feinstein sitting down at a diner with very many loggers. I can tell you that right now. I can talk to them. I know what they want. I know that they'll listen to me. I know they want to be listened to. I can make this work. But I got to have help. I got to have people who are willing to believe in me. I got to have people who will volunteer. I got to have people who will give me a couple $100,000. So if anybody's got a checkbook, feel free to write it. I've got to have your help. So if you want to talk, I'm happy to hang around. You can talk to myself, Julia, Carol, Max. We'll be happy to talk about the campaign. We'll be happy to share with you what we've got. And I'll take questions. I know I don't want to take up the whole program here, but if a couple of questions you wanted me to answer,
We'll take a few questions from Young Guns first.
And we're going to just pass around little tablets, and if you guys want to stay connected online, you can sign up with us that way as well.
Yes. Questions after that long, lengthy speech? Whew. Losing my voice, yes.
Your opponent proposes a constitutional convention process going to state to state to get the states to sign on and get one going, to get money out of politics. What do you suggest for a process?
You can't do it that way. There are 4 ways to get money out of politics. One is to overturn Citizens United. Well, wouldn't totally get it out. But overturning Citizens United, it's never going to happen because we allowed Gorge to get put on the Supreme Court. Number 2 is what you're talking about, which is go and try to get a constitutional amendment, going state to state. You can't do that because essentially the state legislatures are going to control the convention, and most of the state legislatures in this country are Republican. They're never going to allow it. So there are really 2 ways to get money out of politics. And I do not take, by the way, corporate donations. That's one of the things in our campaign. We do not take corporate donations. We only take individual donations. The 2 ways to do it, number 1, there is a way to go around the legislatures, a way to go around the politicians, and that's through ballot initiatives. A group called Represent Us, if you want to look them up sometime, Represent, capital U, capital S. They're a group that was created a couple of years ago out of Massachusetts. They have Jennifer Lawrence now as their spokesperson, so I guess they've got money somewhere. But they're setting up offices. They set one up in San Francisco, and they hired a couple of constitutional lawyers, and the constitutional lawyers are vetting ballot initiatives in these states. And their theory, which I think is a good one, and I think it's going to take some time, but it's a good idea, is to kind of come from bottom up through ballot initiatives locally, where, for example, they've been successful. I think Missouri was one state that were successful in passing a ballot initiatives at the local state level for state legislative races that limit the amount of corporate donations and actually eliminate anything that is not totally transparent. So they're working ballot initiatives up through the system. working to elect then officials who will support the ballot initiatives, the idea being that then they will go on to higher office. The pipeline grows until they get to the national office, and then you see a sort of an overturning of the concept of money in politics. It is not a fast solution, but I think it's probably the most reasonable and the one that's most likely to succeed. They are putting ballot initiatives, if I understand it, in 2018 there will be ballot initiatives in as many as 32 states that will help push this movement. That's the third way, and I think it's probably the best way, although slowest. The fourth way is just public financing of elections, which at some point we have to have politicians who are willing to talk about that, who are willing to put that out there. The positive about public financing, it would allow us to have teachers, police officers, nurses, people who don't normally have high incomes. It would allow them to be able to run for office. You're going to be able to see public financing for local elections. That's a possibility to get started, and again, working its way up. But it's got to be something that's forefront, absolutely put out there in the public mind, and there's not any politicians at this point willing to do that. The only politicians who would do it are busy. I think Bernie would probably do it, but he's busy on other issues. And most of the other politicians actually take, I don't want to disappoint you, but there's a couple of very well-known liberal senators who actually take pretty hefty corporate donations. And so nobody's going to push public financing. But that's the fourth option. So there's only 4 real ways to do it.
Well, immigration is such a hot topic right now, and you didn't really talk about that. I'm really interested in knowing what you're going to do to protect immigrant families, specifically here from the Central Valley, who live in the shadows, who break their backs so that America can eat, and to help them get out of those shadows so that they can have a chance at the American dream.
My wife and I were driving up and we were listening to something where the conservative person was saying, the problem we have with illegal immigrants is they're being paid too much. When you're up against something like that, you just kind of shake your head and realize there's some people that are beyond even talking to. That if you think that the problem with illegal immigration is we're paying those who are here too much money, then you're beyond discussion. I think we have to recognize that the discussion about immigration, it's a moral question, and there's no question it's a moral question. We have people who come here to get away from incredibly tough situations. We have people who are born here whose parents came here from tough situations or difficult situations. We have a real just moral obligation to these people that we are the United States of America. We are the country that represents the best, greatest hope in the history of this civilization for immigration. We are the country that took people in our history as our brand, as our very existence. We are the country of immigrants and immigration. So there is an absolute moral requirement that we provide a path for citizenship to immigrants. And for people who are here for whatever reasons that are currently not legal. But beyond the moral issue, there's an economic issue. We have a huge potential in the state of California, just the state of California, nationally as well. But in the state of California, we have a huge potential to increase a tax base to allow us to do so much more even for education, not just for immigrant children, for all children, by allowing a path to citizenship and letting them provide and pay taxes, just like everybody else, to be legal, to not have to worry about hiding in the shadows. My wife and I have a very close associate that we're working with in terms of trying to get her, she's from Guatemala, and we're trying to get her and her son set up. She has, right now, as we sit here, she has a van following her. Okay? Follow her?
Lovely.
Yeah. It's been following her for 2 days now, and we're scared to death because we don't know what the van is and why. And you talk about just sheer fear. Can you imagine waking up in the morning and going out and driving in your car and you're being followed, and you know that at any minute they could jump out of the van, and the next thing you know, you're in a detention center. And she's been living with this for 2 days, and we don't know what's going to happen. We have to understand. This goes back to what I was talking about with fighting. When Trump said we're going to eliminate the DACA program, that was a purpose, that was a time for Democrats. Instead of when Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi went in and said, no, we're going to negotiate this, we're going to get the DACA program back. We're going to make sure that this program continues. And Trump's saying, well, then help us finance the wall or do this or do that. The Democrats should have, at that very point, instead of going in and saying, we're going to negotiate to get the DACA program back, it should have gone in and said, no, we're not only going to talk about not eliminating the DACA program, we're going to talk about amnesty. We're going to talk providing a path to citizenship now. We don't need, that's what I talk about when I talk about people fighting. We don't need to be talking about compromising on issues like this. Mm-hmm. We have an ability to provide, it's been done, for God's sake, a path to citizenship. It was done under that huge liberal Ronald Reagan. We have the capacity to do it. We just don't have the will to. And the Democratic Party doesn't have the will to, because the Democratic Party looks at it, look, okay, we'll negotiate and get DACA back, and then everybody will be happy, and we'll have our voters, and everybody will be happy. No. We need a path to citizenship, and it's got to be done now.
Thank you.
Sure.
So we'll take one more question.
One more question. Does anyone want to ask me something easy? Something, what did you have for
I will
breakfast?
qualify it. I can't promise it will be easy. And I'm definitely going to give you the benefit of the doubt that this wasn't your point by saying it, but you did mention that the one thing that all Americans would have in common is basic economic interests, which of course is absolutely accurate. But I would say there definitely has to be two things. So we're all racialized human beings. We're all racialized citizens, obviously of different hues, but blackness means something to me, whiteness means something to other folks, Latino-ness means stuff to other folks.
Sure.
So I actually think that's also material interest that is common to everyone, but we like to tell ourselves as a country that it's only important for certain folks and people. So, but to ask you a question and to qualify it, you mentioned that criminal justice reform is really important to you, which of course is only one facet of racial justice. But so either if you want to talk about what you're excited to advocate for criminal justice, or do you want to tell us how your racial justice platform is better than Bernie Sanders or someone? So those are two different questions.
Sure. Frankly, I don't know what Bernie Sanders' criminal justice platform is, but I'll tell you mine. In fact, I wrote a book about the legal system called Mistrial, and partially it's about a number of cases that I've had over the years, but I talk about some of the problems that are in the system, inherent in the system, and what I think are solutions. As far as racial justice, I think number one, first and foremost, is bail reform. I think what you're seeing is, well, I've seen it. I'll tell you a story of a guy who stole a sausage from a 7-Eleven, one of those, I don't know what you call them, Oscar Mayer things or whatever, and was basically caught, thrown in jail. They set his bail at $5,000, which he paid 10%, but that's still $500. Now, if you're taking a sausage in 7-Eleven, you probably don't have $500 sitting around, okay? So, this was in the state of Tennessee. I'll just very briefly tell you, when I graduated from law school, I took a job at the public defender's office. I had chances to go work for corporate law firms, but this is what I wanted to do. And I worked in a public defender's office. So I was working there, and I remember this case so distinctly, because in Tennessee they don't have speedy trial dates like we do in California. So essentially the prosecutor comes to me and says, yeah, give him 60 days in jail. 60 days in jail for sausage? Right. I mean, seriously? He says, well, his other choice is he can sit here for 6 months and go to trial. Well, that's not a heck of a lot of a choice, okay? He couldn't, that is an absolute case where there should have been no bail set. In the meantime, this guy, who did actually have a defense as to what was happening, but he had a job at a restaurant, he was a cook at a restaurant, he had an apartment, he had a girlfriend who lived in the apartment, who had a daughter, because he was sitting there, he lost his job, they lost the apartment, he lost his girlfriend, and I sit there and think, all because if he could have bailed out, all that could have been saved, he could have gone and explained the circumstance with the sausage, everything could have been taken care of, but no, over a silly thing like bail that should have never been said. I'm using that as an example. There are millions of them every day in this country, and I could cite you statistics about the number of people who are actually incapable of making bail in this country every day. It's phenomenal. But it affects their lives just like that. They lose their jobs, they lose everything. So bail reform is number one. Number two is the privatization of prisons. There is absolutely no reason, and Obama did actually eliminate it, try to eliminate it his last year in office, the privatization of prisons. Privatization of prisons are, they're run like corporations. You know, if I can give you a meal for $2 that has pretty decent protein, has some vegetables or whatever and some fruit, versus I can give you a 50-cent meal of grilled cheese or a cheese sandwich or whatever, guess what the private corporation is going to do? They'll give you the cheapest. It's ridiculous. Not only that, they have quotas as to how many people they have to have, so we have to make sure there are arrests to keep their quotas so they can make a profit. Privatization of prisons has got to be eliminated. The third thing has to be in terms of police training. What we have now, and I'm familiar with LAPD, being from LA, what we have in LAPD now is essentially about anywhere from 50 to 60% of their training is in weaponry. About 10% is in de-escalation. So they are essentially being largely trained when they get to a situation that is difficult or whatever. The training is in weaponry, how to use the gun, how to use the stun gun, how to use whatever, versus the concept of actually trying to de-escalate the situation so weaponry is not need to use. That needs to be reversed. It needs to be the exact opposite. And fourthly, and this is less of a racial issue, but more of a gender issue, is we are incredibly enough, this still to this day sort of shocks me, we have for years had the capacity to do rape kits with DNA, and for the most part what we do is we take them and we throw them in a refrigerator, and then we don't fund the ability to actually test them. We allow the potential for rapists to be caught. Nope, we're not going to fund that. Instead, we're going to fund a brand new tank for the police department to have, which I don't know how many tanks the police department really needs, but we're going to fund that instead of actually fund the testing of DNA. Those are four of the main issues. I mean, I'd be happy, I could list 20 of them for you. And like I said, I even wrote a book about it. So
Thank you.
Those are some of the main issues that I have that I think we need to correct. I appreciate you guys listening to me. As I was telling with my wife, she's very happy because I get to rant and rave and with you guys, and now I'll go home and I'll be very quiet. So you won't have to listen to me. But I appreciate your time.
Hang around. Thank you.